I am so excited to welcome you to today's virtual summit, OkayCon 2020. I am here with Devorah Heitner. She is the creator of Raising Digital Natives. She's an expert in helping kids navigate their digital world. She is the author of a wonderful book called Screenwise. I've been hearing hints of a new book, which maybe we can get into a little bit today. Devorah, welcome back to the show. I'm really glad to have you here.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
Yeah, it's cool to see your smiling face. Usually I do these only on audio and because this is for OkayCon 2020 and on the podcast, we get to sort of be in the same virtual room together, which is very fun. So everybody, Devorah's episode of the show, previous episode was episode 116. So I will link to that in the show notes. It's weturnedoutokay.com/116. And Devorah, it's great to welcome a returning champion back to the
Thank
show.
you.
How are things at your house?
Well, it's very different because we're all at my house, which is not our usual MO. We did not rent this apartment thinking like, oh, we'll all be here 24/7. My 11-year-old usually would be going to school and a number of other activities. My husband does work from home on the sun porch, but it's off of our son's room. So again, it wasn't planned for us to all be here at once. And then
Mm.
I rent an office down the street that I've been to about twice since the schools closed a few weeks ago because mostly somebody needs to be kind of looking in on our 11-year-old's distance learning a fair amount and also just helping him get through the day and making him lunch and
Yeah.
making him like sort of get off his tush and do things. And so I'm not getting to my office much, and my office also wasn't safe initially because there was some exposure in that building.
Oh,
So
wow.
now I feel safe at my office, and that, there's potential exposure in both buildings because I live in an apartment building and with multiple units. And so there's potential exposure both at the office, which is multiple units, and here. So
And
it's
at
like,
home. Mm. It's a
just,
tough time for that.
just wash my hands a lot.
Yep, and try to stay positive, right? So you
Yeah.
are in the Chicago area? Yes?
Yeah. I'm in
Yes.
Evanston. Yeah.
Oh, cool. So, I had a really neat experience in the midst of a very scary experience, which, in mid-March, my son and I were visiting Colorado, where my parents live, and, we were out there when the NHL decided that it was not gonna play hockey anymore, and,
Wow.
when they canceled the big basketball tournament, the NCAA, and the last day of our trip, we actually moved our departure up by a couple days because the last day of our departure was the day that all the North American ski hills all closed, and we were like, okay, maybe tomorrow is the day that they decide to stop people from flying, and so we
Mhm.
went home the following day. It was a Sunday, and it was just before St. Patrick's Day, and as we flew over Chicago, first of all, I knew that it was Chicago because it was right on the lake, and I could see these from they were just these tiny little beautiful buildings, and I just remember looking at the city just for as long as I could, like watching out the window, and it just made me feel like, oh, there's people down there. It's gonna be all right. I don't know why that thought came into my head, but it really did. So
Yeah.
hoping it really is gonna be all right for everybody in
I
there.
think it's going to be a while.
I think it will. I think it will, and I'm glad that we're here to talk about all things media and kids in this time, which is really, you are an expert in helping kids, grow up in this digital age. You're also, I mean, I have looked to you for expertise in like how can parents help their kids. What are your sort of clients? What are your readers? What are people asking you about now?
I think people are very concerned about what to green light and how they can mentor while they're also working.
Mm,
So the ideal is that we're mentoring, we're co-viewing, we're using media with kids, we're going slow and starting new things one at a time. And now we're in the situation where our kids may be using numerous new tools for e-learning that are new, as well as potentially some new tools to maintain their social lives that are new. And we're also working while they're doing this. So that's a huge challenge.
yeah.
And I think all of us are, in this together with this challenge, trying to figure it out. And schools are doing the best they can to support parents with the new tools at home, but not everyone's in a great situation to learn that or have access to that. And even if you are pretty competent with tech and comfortable, it's still a huge, and I think also a lot of us are pulling old devices that may not be secure into service to kind of let our kids have access to something I certainly wasn't set up for a full office for either myself or my fifth grader at home. I had an office outside the house. I'm not set up at home. He's not set up at home. His school wasn't very digital. It's a public school, but they weren't doing a lot with tech. So now we're doing everything, on the spare Chromebook, but that won't run certain things. Anyway,
Oh,
it's
wow.
just a lot to sort of navigate. And I think every family is in this situation, piecing it together.
Yeah.
I've been hearing a lot of stories about siblings, 2 or 3 kids sharing one device. And that's the optimal situation where the family has a device, has connectivity. But it's very hard to do your work if all 3 of your teachers are saying, let's meet in a Zoom or a Google Hangout at 10 a.m. and you have 3 kids sharing one device. What do you do?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I even think just for us last night, we've only got one. We've got a college student, so he's got his own setup and they're doing their own thing. But our 15-year-old, just like everyone, has been doing online classes. And for one of them, they're reading the book I, Claudius. And ordinarily we would go to our library and we would get the book out and he would have a hard copy of it to read, which he really likes. And instead what's happening is he and I are basically fighting over this device. And it's only the 2 of us and it's not siblings, and we can do things that we can arrange to have the times, and it's still incredibly frustrating. And I just think about the hardships that this has sort of thrown into light that we would maybe never have noticed.
Oh yeah. And I think that, kids are very habituated to school and the routines of school. And some kids are loving being out of school, by the way. So not every kid is missing school, or at least, and there may be kids who miss some aspects of school, but not others. So there are certainly some experiences that kids will come away from that will be, it's hard to say positive necessarily because it's such a profoundly disruptive and traumatic experience for most people. But I think there are some things we'll learn about ourselves that will be useful going forward and will be informative and helpful in terms of, and there are probably kids who will ask to be homeschooled after this. And, many parents will be like, heck no. And a few might be like, yeah, actually, it turns out it wasn't as bad as I thought.
Yeah.
And of course, these are the worst conditions. Like actual homeschooling would involve a community of homeschoolers and being able to go to museums and libraries and take classes in the community. So this isn't even a good trial run of homeschooling. And also most families that homeschool have planned who's going to do it and what they're going to do for their paid work. And, it's not just thrust upon them, like literally with a day's notice, like it was for us. I mean, our schools on Thursday night, they were saying they were going to shut down extracurriculars. And on Friday morning, they were like, the school, like, don't come back on Monday. I mean, it was pretty bad.
So it went so quickly. So I'm really glad that you brought that up because we've homeschooled since my oldest was 7, he's now 19. And my youngest was 3. And a blogger that I love and follow, in fact, my son is now in a school that is in this learning model, which is called Liberated Learners. It's very, it's non-coercive. You get to choose your classes. It's a little bit like if you were a high school student going to a community college kind of.
Is it local to you or is it national?
Well, he goes to one that is quote local. It's about, it's like an hour away with traffic. It's hard for us to get there. To get him there, but it's so clear that he's thriving there that we really want to keep him there. But anyway, the director of another school in this, because it is a kind of homeschooling, and like my son isn't involved in like a school, there won't be a diploma, that sort of thing. But so we work through it as homeschoolers now. And but this guy said, he wrote a blog post called "Everyone is not homeschooling now." And
no, I agree. I would agree with that. I think this is more like just kind of survival school. And we are collaborating with our kids' teachers too. So, I mean, I think it's both insulting to our kids' schools if they go to a conventional school and say we're homeschooling, because the teachers are still providing the curriculum and contact hours in various ways, hopefully not like 8 hours of synchronous contact, but still something creating work as well. And I just got a note from my son's teacher that something's missing and I'm going to check with him, so like there's contact and she's looking at the work as it comes in. But and we're dealing with like 504 related stuff too. And so like that committee is checking in, and literally like we just started the 504 right before this, and now they're saying like, how's the 504 going? And I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, is the cat giving my kid accommodations? Like, how can you even ask me that right now? But
so just anyway, what's the 504? That's not
504 is a education plan. So there's different education laws, and there's an education law that provides for something called an IEP, and then there's a different education law that provides for something called a Section 504, and those are education plans. So typically a 504 doesn't involve any specific minutes. Like an IEP would be like you get minutes with the social worker or the speech therapist. A 504 would just be like extra time on tests or other kinds of accommodations.
Different level of special, accommodation.
Yeah, and it's a different law that provides it. So 504 could also be that your kid has to have access to their inhaler. It could be for like a physical health
Yes. Yeah.
issue.
Yeah.
It's all kinds of things. But anyway, since we just started it, I'm like, I don't know how it's going. How's it going? Right. I mean,
Yeah.
you
I
tell me.
find one thing that I'm curious about is, and so this is from my perspective as a child development expert. I wonder how it's possible for a teacher to sort of help kids feel like they're in a community. I mean, for me, it's not so much about like what subjects are being covered, what tests are
Right.
being graded. It's more like, how are we helping these kids feel like they're still part of a classroom community if they can't be anymore? How are we helping
I
their
think the Google
families?
Hangouts and the sort of anything simultaneously where they can see other kids' faces.
Yeah,
Although
yeah,
for younger kids, that can be overwhelming. So I think smaller groups are, helpful is what we're seeing. But for my fifth grader, and I think for some older kids, at least some time per day, for high schools that have an advisory, to get together and have that advisory, that lunch group. And so
yeah,
even if it's a half an hour a day where like they're doing sort of a lunch bunch thing, and then there was a little bit of collaboration that was like peer collaboration that the teacher set up that was like one-to-one where, just two kids plus her were meeting about a project they were working on. I think those are good ways to, strengthen the community. I do think that that's reliant on the community they'd already built. And so say we go back to school in the fall and this is still the situation, I think it'll be much harder. Like my son will be starting middle school and will have theoretically 7 or 8 new teachers that he would be meeting online. I think that would be a very
yeah,
different situation than this situation where it was March. So since September or August, this group of kids and teacher have been getting to know each other. In some ways are already sick of each other, but they're also like love each other
yeah,
and
yeah,
have relationships and have expectations. And so for them to meet on the Google Hangout really draws on, just like when we do a Zoom call with our family, we're drawing on existing relationships, whereas, having a Zoom call with a bunch of strangers would not be the same experience.
yeah, yeah,
Um, and I think that's really important. So I think we do have to think about what teachers already built in terms of community this year versus what it could be like starting a new school year, where typically, unless
yeah,
you're at a Waldorf or, a very small public school that has looping or something, typically, kids get at least one new teacher every year. And if your kid like mine is moving from elementary to middle, you're going from one to
oh,
many. That's a
yeah,
very different scenario. And so I am wondering how they'll build community. In some ways, I think
yeah.
that all kids should keep their teacher from this year for next year.
Yeah, and that was literally what was going through my mind. There are great models for that, for that kind of thing. I think the question is how can we build this into like our how can we really react so quickly that they end school this year with these laws or rules in place, and then they start next year with different expectations that are going to work better for this system. It's making me think of just today I was finding out that there are restaurants. It's related. I feel like it's not exactly the same thing, but there are some restaurants that are saying, we don't accept cash, for example. And but my understanding is that everybody has to accept cash because cash is the currency. And like, how can you like? We're now coming up against a point where cash is maybe a little bit, of a viral problem with coronavirus,
Mhm.
but it's the law that you accept cash. So it's really, I think things like that are also coming into the spotlight, and it's like, how do we resolve these things? How will we?
Right.
It's curious. I think when I'm in my more positive moments, I think it's a very interesting thing to think about. When I'm in the more negative moments, it's a little bit frightening.
Yeah, no, I think we have so many problems to solve as a society right now, and it'll be really interesting to see. And I think putting kids to work on some of that, not in a stressful way, but certainly if they, are interested in making masks or doing anything like that, I think that could be
Yeah,
really positive. I think a lot of kids are, we know, I mean, the research tells us that altruism decreases our stress and anxiety and makes us feel a sense of control. And there are not that many safe things that kids can do. I mean, initially high school kids were volunteering to babysit in many communities, but now we're really trying to say that that's not safe and that's too much contact. And there's still families, of course, that need emergency childcare, families of healthcare workers, and other sort of essential people. And so I think we're trying to figure that out. I don't think anyone has
yeah,
the right answers, but one of the things I was talking about with one high school where a lot of high school kids are doing sibling care, which makes sense that they would sort of, if I had a high school, I'd be thrilled for them to be homeschooling my 11-year-old. And so I totally understand that. I said, well, can you start to give community service credit? Because this is a large public high school that would usually have the kids with a community service requirement. Of course, none of them can be in the community right now. So I was like, can you document that they're helping their siblings homeschool? or even if they're helping their neighbor kid homeschool by Zoom, you know, whatever. I mean, I would, again, if I had a 16-year-old that I could get to do this kid's math with him, I'd be thrilled.
Yeah.
I don't know
Yeah.
how to do it. So, you know, I was just trying to think of creative ways that we could actually recognize what teenagers are doing that's positive, but also give them credit for it. You know, in some ways, of course, I love the idea of altruism just for the sake of altruism, but in a school where you must do community service to graduate,
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
pragmatically, how can we recognize the labor that kids may be assuming that's new?
You know what's really interesting about this too? So a week or so ago, I had a conversation with a home and family defense expert to talk specifically, to be part of OkayCon 2020, to talk specifically about, like, in this crisis that we're in, how can people keep their homes and their families safe? And one of the ideas that he came up with, or one of the ideas that we talked about, was that, like, if you have bored teenagers,
Mm-hmm.
that's a potential risk. Like, we don't
Mm-hmm.
want the teenagers to get so bored that they are now trying to, you know, knock down mailboxes and enter homes with a
Yeah, no,
doors
of
are unlocked.
course. Board
So
teenagers are
how,
definitely always a risk.
yeah, and how can we instead kind of motivate them to be helpful in the community? Like, maybe they could mow somebody's lawn, maybe they could earn money, maybe, you know, and to sort of, we got into the idea of, like, gaining the confidence to offer to do that for someone. You know what I mean? Like, you're building these teenagers skills and good feelings, and a sort of integration into the community, rather than having a bunch of bored, angry, frustrated
Right.
teens.
And I think that anything we can do to sort of harness the sort of innovative power of youth, and just recognize too that they're mourning and grieving the rites of passage that they looked forward
Yeah.
to, and that we taught them to be obsessed with. We taught them that getting into college and going to prom and all, you know, and, like, you know, their athletic achievements were so important. So we shouldn't be surprised if they're really bummed out right now.
Yeah, one of my closest friends, her daughter was just voted captain of her softball team. It's her senior year. She should be graduating, and it's questionable that they'll even have a season. But, like, it's
Yeah.
bittersweet. But it's just so nice that they, you know, that she was honored in that way. But it's like, oh. So I want to shift a little bit. I'd love to talk a little bit about media literacy,
Yeah.
something that you are such an expert in. I kind of want to relate it to what is happening now in the US, in particular in the US, because that's where, you know, a lot of our listeners are. And so, how do you see the intersection of COVID-19 and media literacy? Have you got
I
thoughts
mean,
on that?
yeah, I mean, you know, my sort of political hot take is, you know, when you have a situation where doctors are being told that they can't share information, where journalists are worried about their profit models and keeping their newspapers and newsrooms open. I mean, we just have a terrible situation with information in this country, so much misinformation.
Mm,
Um, you know, when you have a situation where, you know, stations won't even air the president's briefings because they're so filled with inaccurate information that's misleading and actually dangerous for people to hear, because they could die because if they follow the bad advice, like, that's the stakes, like life and death misinformation.
yeah, yeah,
um, we're in a rough time. And I think when we're trying to teach our kids not to be total cynics and haters, which I certainly, you know, like, I can be sarcastic and cynical, but I don't want my 11-year-old to just, like, go down that road of being a super cynic. But at the same time, these are very disturbing times. And so we do want to teach kids to read between the lines, to trust trusted news sources, to double check their information if kids are sharing memes. And, like, a lot of times parents say, oh, my kid's not looking at news, but they do have quite a bit of news in their social stream that parents aren't aware of.
yeah,
So it's very important to ask your kid where they're getting their news, what they know about what's happening right now, what they know about this illness, what they understand. Because even the sort of information that young people weren't getting very sick from it actually turns out to be a little bit less, you know, rock solid, for example. And of
yeah,
course, yes, teenagers seem to be in a relatively safe group in the sense that they're not sort of dying and getting super sick. But even people in their 20s, 30s, certainly people in their 40s and 50s, which is their parents' age, can get very sick and die. And people are dying who are our age. So as much as our kids might say they hate us, they don't want to be orphaned. They don't want us to die. And I think this is the time to be clear with them that that could be the stakes, that if you bring this home to me and dad, like, you know, I hope you like the cousins that might be raising you if they make it. And not to, like, be mean about it, but just, like, don't go hang out with your friends when I'm not around, because those are the stakes.
yeah, yeah.
The
This
stakes
is,
are very
yeah,
high. And, like, really a lot of teenagers in my own community were gathering, and the high school principal got on YouTube and was like, stop it.
yeah, yeah. My husband told me that the governor of Rhode Island And this isn't specifically about teenagers, but this was about a group of people gathering in excessively large, I don't remember where, beaches actually, I think, in Rhode Island. And
And
the
they shut them down. In Chicago, we shut down the beach.
yeah, and the governor
Terrible.
basically said, "Knock it off," was what she said, and so
Right.
there are now T-shirts made that say "Knock it off." And
That's great. I mean, Lori Lightfoot, the mayor of Chicago, shut down the beaches, and there's pictures of her like in front of the beach with a police barricade. And there haven't been very many nice days, but there was one nice day last week, and people went out to the beaches, and she shut them down.
Yeah, yeah.
So
I mean,
thankfully in Evanston, where I live, you can still walk or bike ride by the beach if you maintain your distance.
Yep.
But I worry, and if we have to be here all summer and not go to the beach, I mean,
Oh
not go to
my gosh.
camp and not do anything, I mean, that would be devastating.
Yeah, yeah, it would. It's and yet it's done for the right reasons, but it's so frustrating. I wanted to go back to a question that we just briefly touched on, which was, what are your thoughts on best sources for people to get their news?
Sure. I mean, I'm a big public radio person. I also think, the newspapers of record. So, New York Times, Washington Post, wherever you live, the newspaper of record, certainly here in my city, that would be Chicago Tribune,
Yeah.
So I'm looking at your newspaper of record, your national newspapers, your good local and national radio stations, and then also looking at some of the, more medical news sources or business news sources, if you're interested in what are the effects on business or other things. But I think for kids, I would look at National Geographic for Kids, Time for Kids. I would definitely not want elementary schoolers right now just looking at the news in general, unless you're ready to talk about football field-sized graves in Iran and, thousands of people dying in the United States right now.
And
People dying alone, people texting their family members that are dying alone and dying in a horrible way, in a terrifying way. I think we probably want to keep some of that from our kids while impressing on them that the stakes are high.
And I think a lot of times what could happen with listeners and viewers to our show who primarily have very young children, 2, 3, 4, 5-year-olds, is that it's not so much that the child will happen upon that by themselves, but that they would overhear people talking about it, overhear it. And it makes me want to share a couple of ideas that I've been having that I've been teaching.
Yeah, I mean, I think you want to control like your voice and your breath, and also maybe not talk to your spouse about it in bed when your kid can hear, that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And so one thing that I've heard a lot of parents talking about that's been very disturbing for them is when kids play that stuff in their play. Like a really great comic that's in the Boston Globe, in our paper of record, was a graphic artist writing on the opinion pages, and what she was saying was, like, she's got images of her little boy playing with a train track, and in his play he is saying, this is the COVID-19 track, everybody on this track gets sick. And it's breaking her heart, but that's what kids need. They need to be able to play things out, and things that they hear and take, they need. So if your child is doing that, it's more than okay. I would say it's necessary.
I think kids do need to work it out in their play. I mean, the flip side is, people have documented that kids were teasing other kids at school and saying, you have the virus and stuff. And I think that, it's tough because that sort of othering, I mean, it's like this version of cooties and it's managing anxiety. On the other hand, it's really painful. So I do think schools need to kind of address it when it was coming up in school. I mean, now kids are mostly out of school, although not everywhere. I think there's still some schools running somewhere.
Yeah, I hope not. But I suppose you never really know, do you?
I think they just closed in Montana, which I know is a later state.
Yeah.
But I think that, as this permeates the country, I think people will close schools everywhere.
Yeah. And I mean, it does look like we'll be in this situation for at least a couple of months, if not, as you were saying before, if not more. What thoughts have you got for parents who are trying to explain what's going on to their younger kids? I mean,
I think we have to let them know how unusual this is and how different it is than, typical concerns about getting sick. And I know some parents are worried about like introducing OCD, I mean, with all the hand washing and all the things, and not that you can sort of make your child get that, but if someone was already had those tendencies or was already struggling with a little bit of compulsion or a little bit of anxiety, then it's hard to sort of enforce what feels like safety levels right now without, I mean, all of these things are really tricky, right? So just talk to them about what your family is doing right now to stay safe. Like, we're not seeing my mother-in-law, so we're talking a lot about what we can do to help Grammy be less isolated during this time. So we're playing Boggle with her by FaceTime every night. And my son's doing a lovely online theater group for 2 weeks. The local theater company scrambled and came up with something really fast, which is the kids are doing this like parody news or, play for 2
Awesome.
weeks, which is super fun. And he's seeing other kids. It's great. I mean, I wish it would go on because I think, he needs more things like this. But I had him practice his lines with Grammy today on FaceTime, partly because I'm trying to work, but also to just give her some contact. And he was like, I can practice them on my own. He loves her, but he was just like, I don't really need help. And I was like, but she does. She
Yeah,
needs to
but
see your
yeah,
face
exactly.
a
You're
few
helping.
times a day.
Yeah,
Because
you're
like the
helping your
most cheerful thing in her life is like your cute face right now.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
that is,
Oh, I love that idea. I think, I mean, it even makes me think of my own kids. Like, my oldest spontaneously texted my mother out in Colorado just to say, "How are you?" And my mom got back to me and she was like, "Max did this," and I was like, "Oh,
yeah.
it's so good." And I love the idea of Boggle with your grandmother too. I think that's really
Yeah, it's so much fun. I mean, this is with my husband's mother, but we can't see her. She's 89 years old. We can't go see her. We're hoping
yeah,
we'll be able to see her eventually if we continue to isolate. But given the apartment we live in and the sort of lack of control in some ways we have over some degree of isolation until like we don't get groceries anymore, I'm not sure when it will be safe. And no one can really tell us because you don't know if you have this thing. I mean, that's one of the really tough things. It's really hard to know when it's safe to go see vulnerable people.
yeah, yeah. Um, you just mentioned that you're not getting groceries anymore. Is that what I heard you say?
Yeah, so we've really stopped trips to the grocery store, but we're doing curbside. But
Okay.
even the shared laundry room in our building, like I just feel like it's hard to know when we're totally isolated enough that we could go see someone who's 89 years old who already has some breathing issues.
Yeah, yeah. And it is, we have a mutual friend, Jessica Leahy, whose
Yeah.
husband, Tim Leahy, is an infectious diseases doctor and did a few weeks ago, when we're recording this in early April, it was a few weeks into March or
Mhm.
late March that Tim Leahy recorded, well, they did it together, but it was like this hour-long, wonderful Q&A. And he really helped me understand the idea of like mitigating risk. Like,
Mhm.
sometimes you do have to go to the grocery store. What can you
Right, and,
do?
like, obviously not eating would be very risky, and at a
Yes,
certain point, maybe,
exactly.
like, for my mother-in-law, there's a point where, like, isolation for months on end would be, risky to her mental health and even her physical health because I know she's not exercising really, like, I think we do need to go see her at some point, but it's just hard to know right now, and the more we know and, I'm not gonna necessarily say I'll wait for a vaccine, but, if I saw some more promising treatments, that might make me feel more comfortable seeing her. If I saw that the hospitals had more resources, like, and more PPE, I would feel more comfortable. Like just any improvement in the situation right now. We're like 2 weeks away from the peak in Chicago. The
Mm,
hospitals are already overrun. It's bad. And so I
yeah,
just feel like this is like we're battening down the hatches. But as there are incremental potentially improvements in outcomes or anything, I might feel like, okay, now it's worth going to see her because, when somebody's that age, you don't just avoid them for a year and hope for the
yeah,
best.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a mitigated risk. You got to figure out when do you take the chance. So we are wrapping up. We're going to finish up really soon. I would we were talking about good sources, and we were talking about kind of positive things, and one little positive. Uh, it's newsy, I suppose, positive newsy type source that I have found recently is John Krasinski's Some Good News.
Mhm.
He's started this little Facebook Live, basically, or YouTube Live from his own home. He dresses up in a suit. His daughter's made a little a graphic says SGN and like magic marker, and
Mhm.
he sends what he does off to an editor, and like it ends up looking like an adorable, like an adorable parody of a news show. And all the news is positive news, and they interview people like Steve Carell, and they have video footage of a man visiting his wife who's in like an elder care situation, and they're singing Amazing Grace through the window because that's what they can.
Mhm.
I mean, it's heartbreaking, but it's also positive, and so I just want.
Yeah. Well, and I do think, like I said, I mean, I think this is a very rough situation, but I do think we're going to learn things that will be useful in our lives going forward and be helpful. And families will learn a lot more about their kids' tech. Kids are going to learn ways to maintain relationships via tech, and they'll learn the sort of strength of those relationships. A lot of kids who are already really adept at community via video games and social media may have things to teach their parents and siblings about how to maintain relationships in these spaces. So I think our kids have a lot of skills that they can share with us.
Hmm.
Um, I do think it's, really a big change though. And I think that school is only part of it. I think it's all the extracurriculars. I think it's our religious communities if we're involved with that. I think it's volunteering in the community. I think, there's so many losses right now. And I think we're just kind of beginning to process that. So I know for us, like losing these end of fifth grade rituals and the fifth grade play and fifth grade graduation and the chance to walk through the whole school and be applauded and see all the teachers they had for the last 6 years was like one piece. But then if we lose summer, then there's all the losses with that. There's seeing my parents who live out of town, like when will we see them again, and it just starts to mount. And so it's very challenging. And for me as a writer, like finding that time to do deep work while I'm checking in with my 11-year-old and saying, hey, like 3 hours of geometry dash is kind of a lot. Like, how about you read a book? Or like,
Yeah.
like it's not bad. I mean, like, do I think he'll be harmed by 3 hours of geometry dash? I don't.
Happy if
I think that's like an ideal way to spend every day. Like, is it balanced? Is it, what I would say would be like really great use of tech? It's probably not so balanced.
Yeah.
And so, I want him to learn to self-regulate. I may need to help with that because he's coming from a totally top-down, rigid, typical American school where he was told what to do. And so our kids are, people who unschool have to take a while to like teach their kids to unschool. It doesn't just happen this way.
Yep.
And if you want your kid to go back to school, unschooling may not be what you want to do right now because your kid will not be happy.
Yeah, to go
so,
back.
I mean, I think we really have to think about, those we're coming from these mostly very hierarchical, very rigid, very routinized places. Many kids feel very comfortable and very safe in those places. They may not love every aspect of it. They may find some of it boring or, whatever. But to go to a totally unstructured place is also a big leap. And so, I think kids will learn to self-regulate. I think there's a lot. My kid is pursuing some interests that were really strong. And then some other things are completely not working. Like I thought piano lessons would translate very well to Zoom. It's a disaster. It's not working at all. But this theater class, which I would have thought, who would have thought a theater class would be fun online, but it's pretty fun.
It's fun.
I'm not saying we won't run back to the theater to do face-to-face when that's a possibility, but like some things work and some things don't. And some other family might find an instrumental tutorial one-to-one does work.
Yeah.
One of my friend's kids decided she wanted to have a bat mitzvah after all, now that she's got time to prep. And she's teaching herself like with a tutor, but with Hebrew.
Wow. That's so
amazing, right? But like, not every kid's going to love that. I mean, for some kids, it's about the relationship and about the friends at religious school. And like not having that will make the whole thing a big drag.
Yeah. And I really think what you're getting at is we're all learning here. And I think some of the learning is going to be good, positive learning that helps kids gain confidence in themselves. It helps them know themselves a little better, helps them know their limits or, what they're interested in, all those good things,
Yeah. I think it's very hard to know where we'll be at the end of it. But I do think that for families that are strong, for families that have a little bit of extra resources, for families that this isn't the crushing blow where like the second parent loses a job or a single parent who's already stretched. I think this can be a time of pulling together and finding resilience and closeness. There are definitely siblings who are going to get closer, but my singleton child is very envious of friends with siblings. And I said, you've got some friends who by a month from now would be ready to sell you their sibling or maybe even pay you. Because, family, like I'm in a 900 square foot apartment. If we were in here with a couple more kids,
Boy,
I think it would be tight. Yeah. It would be real tight. And I know families that are in those situations. And so, and I also know people whose work is really stretching them right now. I have a single parent friend who is working at least 60 hours a week, if not more. And I saw her the other day for a distant walk and she was like, I don't know what my sixth grader's doing. I think he's doing school, but her work is she's doing recruiting for a company that desperately needs workers right now. And she's just got no time to breathe.
Yeah. There's definitely discrepancies in family life. And, we got to hope that everybody, I would wish that everybody had extra resources, you know what I mean? And
yeah, I mean, I feel spread thin, but I recognize my privilege in every way in this. And I just see how kids who are already struggling academically will struggle more. And also, I have friends who teach in Chicago public schools who are telling me they've got kids who they don't think will be back.
Wow.
Like, this is it. If you were already truant and they already went through a strike this year, so they were already out for a while in the fall. If you had kids who are on the bubble, if they're already not showing up to school on a regular basis and they don't have that family support at home right now, nobody's got a computer or internet at home, those are the kids that the schools will lose. Mm-hmm. And then we'll see that uptick in the school to prison pipeline in a few years because those are the kids who don't, they're not coming back.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
those are the kids I'm very concerned about right now. I mean, I think the kids who are writing this out at home with their stressed out working parents
Yeah.
and maybe spending a few extra hours on geometry dash and not, as many hours on the less preferred subjects, or, maybe they're high schoolers and they're sleeping a lot right now, but their parents are kind of there for them. Those kids are ultimately going to be okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But the kids who are really were already in trouble, and not getting the support they needed, and were sort of already on the edge of really serious outcomes. Those kids are really, I'm very concerned for them, and I want, as a society, we really need to think about how not to lose them. I guess I don't want to say we're losing them. I want to say what are we going to do? What are the jobs programs? What are the support systems? What is the extra therapists that schools are going to hire and the extra social workers? Who's calling the kids that aren't checking into online learning? In my local high school, half the kids haven't checked into online learning, and after the first 2 weeks, who's calling those homes and saying, hey, what's up? What can we do to support you?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's, I think, what we need to be thinking about as a country.
Yeah. Yeah. That's how we will, get out of this, I think.
I
So,
hope.
okay, last question, because we are over our time by at least a little bit. But we mentioned before that you have written one wonderful book, one of my favorite books, called Screenwise. It's available for you watching and listening to really help your child to kind of navigate their way through the digital landscape. What's the new book about?
So I'm working on a book that's about growing up in public and about the kind of ways we form identity, and how as parents we can kind of help our kids steward their experience of growing up and kind of protect their ability to find out who they are and figure out their reputation and privacy
And you
in
mean
this world of growing up in public.
growing up in public by, like, we've got videos of our babies on YouTube and Facebook and stuff.
All of that. Right. And the idea that colleges can look at what you've done, and this whole idea of sort of a digital footprint.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well,
I'm really pushing back on that idea, actually.
yeah, I'm excited to hear about that, and I'm very, very excited to bring you back on the show when it comes out, so that
Thank you. I just signed with a great literary agent, which is thrilling for me, because I didn't get to work with an agent on my last book, so I'm really excited to have her
Oh,
guide me.
congratulations. That's very, very exciting. Well, blessings to you in this crazy, crazy time. I wish for you that you get lots of writing time, and that the geometry dash goes well, and
It's all going to be fine. I mean, and that's the thing. If that's the worst of it, but I think the worst of it also is like where will we be at as a family in 6 months, 18 months? I mean, as we look at the amount of time, I think this not having schools open is so disruptive to society that we're going to have to really look at what that means.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm really glad that you are going to be a part of that. I'm really glad that I'm going to, we are educated people with good minds and good intentions, and my hope is that we will win the day.
Yes, I hope so too. And I think there are a lot of really caring educators and parents and other people out there trying to figure this out. So I do believe that, and even just seeing the artistic response and folks like Mo Willems who are doing the Daily Doodle and all of this really cool stuff, I do think it's brought out a lot of altruism and a lot of sharing and a lot of creativity in a lot of people, and that is beautiful.
Yep. And you in your home watching or listening, or both, I know that, if you're listening to the show, you've already got your head screwed on straight. So I love that, because what you are doing is what we need. And I kind of want to go out on that. I am going to definitely link to Mo Willems' Daily Doodle, because I love Mo Willems.
Yes. Isn't it adorable? I love that.
Adorable. And it's so great. Well, Devorah Heitner, thank you so much for being a part of our summit. Thank you for coming on the show again. It's been such a great time. It's gone super fast talking to you. So
yeah, of course. It's great talking with you, and I'm glad I could be part of this. And I just want to encourage everyone out there to keep on keeping on too. I think parents need to give themselves a lot of grace right now. And, you don't look at the color-coded schedule that someone else shared on Facebook. Just do what you need to do, and also talk with your kid about what priorities they have during this time and what they're hoping to learn, and see if you can support that. But we don't have to make ourselves crazy. This doesn't have to be the time where, your kid learns Mandarin and, whatever.
No, it can be a time for good family communication and connection and giggles, so. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I want to say a quick thank you to you for watching and listening, and also a quick and super special thank you to our producer, the man who not only does he produce the show, he's the voice that you hear at the top of it. He is the 22-time winner of the Husband of the Year award. He's been and I want to say thank you to him very, very much for all that he does. And again, thank you so much for watching and listening, and we will see you next time.